Welcome to this video series on the self-defense syllabus contained in the Korean katas. What I want to do in this little introductory video is explain why you might not have seen this bunkai in your standard karate classes. So to do that, we need to look at the history of karate and how it's evolved since the 1700s to the present day. As you no doubt know, karate evolved or began in Okinawa in Japan in about the 1700s. At that time, kata was a very important part of the learning process of karate. Each master would have 2 or 3 katas that they worked around, and they would teach that to their students. First, the students would learn the katas, and then the master would go on to explain the techniques contained in the katas and how they would be used for self-defense. As more and more students learned karate, in the case of the Korean katas, a pair of Korean students went over to Japan, learned karate, and then came back home. They found that people like the military were interested in the karate they had taught, and they volunteered to teach the military. But when asked how long it would take to teach the military cadets how to do karate, they come up with a number of like 6 years or something like that, whereas the military wanted something like 6 weeks. So at this point, the Koreans went away and redesigned their katas, and that's where I believe the Korean katas, as we know them today, came into being. Now, the reason we don't see them in their sort of self-defense form is because at the time, Korea was under occupation by Japanese forces and other military forces. So the practicing of violent techniques and fighting was not permitted. And in fact, the Korean karate teachers had to get permission from the local generals to actually practice at all. So the techniques in the katas were sort of made more safer and friendly. So we ended up with the idea that it's all blocks and all defensive and there's no actual attacking. Whereas, as we will see, most of the techniques are actually attacking techniques. The other side of it is that to make it more popular, karate was targeted at children in schools and trying to get karate onto the school syllabus. And therefore the more aggressive attacking techniques that are needed for self-defense were kind of changed into more sort of passive and defensive techniques. Another thing is that over the years the WKF has developed karate from a self-defense system into a sport where we have separate kumite and kata is done for its own right rather than a descriptive or syllabus system. And so that's why we don't see katas nowadays in the way that we used to see them, or they used to see them. When we look at the katas, it's important to remember that the katas are a teaching aid and they are a form of notation of the moves in self-defense. They're not necessarily exactly the self-defense moves themselves. The analogy I like to use is the comparison between musical sheet music and music itself. The sheet music describes the music, but it isn't the music itself. And in the same way, kata describes the self-defense techniques, but it isn't necessarily the self-defense techniques themselves. So you have to look at the kata, interpret them, and then evolve them and adapt them. So like you're playing a piece of music, you can add expression to different parts, and in the same way when you're interpreting the katas, you can add expression to different parts of the moves to attack and defend in different ways. One thing that should be emphasized is that nowadays the threat that katas are supposed to defend against is not the same as the sort of threat that we have these days. In those days, the katas are designed to really defend against somebody trying to take something off you, like your money or your valuables or something like that. These days, the threats are possibly more somebody just wanting to jump on you and hit you and attack you for whatever reason. So the katas are not necessarily a perfect self-defense system for today, but we're looking at them from a historical point of view of what the katas looked like in the past and how we can interpret them as they would have been interpreted in the past. So it's almost like an archaeological exercise more than a self-defense video. Okay, let's get started.